The Wolfless Omega slapped the Alpha King. His response left everyone speechless. "You mistake silence for submission, Your Majesty." The voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the heavy silence of the grand hall like a glass shard. Ivelisse stood trembling, her hand stinging, the red imprint of her palm blossoming vividly against the impossible pale marble of King Alden Ravenshire's cheek. The entire court, dukes, lethal betas, and preening socialites, had turned to stone. The air was sucked out of the room. To strike an alpha was treason. To strike the Alpha King was suicide. Alden slowly turned his head back to center. His eyes, usually a bored storm grey, were now terrifyingly black. He didn't growl. He didn't tear her throat out. Instead, he tilted his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Do it again," he said softly. The Moonshadow Gala was less a celebration of the lunar equinox and more a meat market wrapped in silk and malice. The air in the Obsidian Palace was thick, perfumed with heavy lavender and rosewater, a desperate attempt to mask the underlying scent of aggression, musk, pine, wet earth, and the metallic tang of competitive pheromones. To a wolf, it was a symphony of scents. To Ivelisse, it was a suffocating fog. Ivelisse adjusted the high, scratchy collar of her server's uniform, keeping her eyes fixed on the polished obsidian floor. In a room full of apex predators, the safest place to be was invisible. She was the Wolfless, a genetic dead end, a biological glitch in the rigid hierarchy of shapeshifters. At 23, she had never shifted, never heard the inner voice of a wolf, and never felt the pull of the moon. To the pack, she was effectively furniture, useful, silent, and easily replaced. "Champagne, girl, and try not to breathe on it," a sharp voice snapped. Ivelisse paused, extending the silver tray with practiced servitude. Jessamine, the Duke's daughter and the court's favorite to become the next Luna, didn't even glance at her. Jessamine was busy preening, her golden hair cascading over a dress of spun silver that cost more than Ivelisse's entire life earnings. She smelled of expensive perfume and rot, the scent of someone beautiful on the outside and decaying within. "He looks bored, doesn't he?" Jessamine whispered to her companion, Blaine Thornwall, her eyes locked on the throne. "Alden. He looks like he wants to burn the palace down just to see the colors." Ivelisse risked a glance toward the dais. Alden Ravenshire sat sprawled on the velvet seat, one leg hooked casually over the armrest, a goblet of dark wine dangling precariously from his fingertips. He was devastatingly handsome, dark hair sweeping over a brow furrowed in perpetual cynicism, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. But his energy was heavy. It pressed down on the room like a physical weight, a gravitational field of lethargy and latent violence. He wasn't just an alpha. He was a vortex. "He is waiting for a challenge," Blaine murmured, his voice oily and smooth. Blaine was the king's advisor, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, and whose scent was always masked by mint and cold iron. "But there is no one here strong enough to offer it. Just sheep in wolf's clothing." "Perhaps I should offer him a dance," Jessamine cooed, stepping back. Ivelisse moved to withdraw, sensing the shift in movement, but she wasn't fast enough. Jessamine's heel, accidentally, caught the hem of Ivelisse's skirt. It happened in agonizing slow motion. Ivelisse stumbled. The tray tipped. Crystal flutes slid off the silver surface, shattering against the polished floor with a sound like breaking bones. Champagne, expensive, vintage, sticky, soaked the hem of Jessamine's pristine gown. The music stopped. The chatter died. Every head turned. "You clumsy, useless thing!" Jessamine shrieked, the transformation rippling under her skin, her face contorted, beauty twisting into snarls, her eyes flashing a feral gold. "Do you know what this silk costs? It's worth more than your life." "I apologize, my lady," Ivelisse said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut like a cold snake. She knelt instantly to pick up the jagged shards of glass, ignoring the slice against her thumb. "I will fetch a cleaning cloth immediately." "You will lick it off," Jessamine hissed, stepping forward. The cruelty of the pack took over, the mob mentality shifting the room's atmosphere from party to hunt. The crowd tittered, sensing blood. It was a game to them. Humiliate the Wolfless, remind the runt of her place. "That is all you are good for, scavenging." Ivelisse froze. Her hand hovered over a piece of broken crystal. A heat, unfamiliar and searing, rose in her chest. It wasn't the heat of a wolf. It was the heat of a human pushed too far. She looked up, meeting Jessamine's glowing gaze. "No." The word was quiet, but in the acoustic perfection of the hall, it echoed like a gunshot. Blaine Thornwall stepped forward, sneering, enjoying the show. "You refuse a high-ranking wolf, Omega. You have no rank. You have no wolf. You are nothing." Ivelisse stood up, glass crunching under her worn shoes. "I am human enough to have dignity," she replied, her voice trembling but clear. "Dignity?" Jessamine laughed, a harsh, barking sound that grated on the ears. She raised her hand, claws lengthening into razor-sharp points, ready to discipline the servant. "I'll show you dignity." "Enough." The single word didn't just stop the action. It vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the teeth of everyone present. King Alden had not moved quickly, but his presence had expanded, filling every corner of the room, displacing the air. He stood slowly, the movement languid yet predatory, and descended the dais steps. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before a storm. Alden stopped between Jessamine and Ivelisse. He didn't look at the noblewoman. He didn't look at Blaine. He looked down at the server. He sniffed the air, frowning deeply. "No scent," Alden murmured, sounding genuinely perplexed. He leaned closer, invading her personal space, inhaling deeply near her neck. "You smell like rain on cold stone. Nothing else. No fear musk, no submission." "I am Ivelisse, Your Majesty. I am wolfless," she said, keeping her chin high, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Wolfless." Alden tasted the word, rolling it around his mouth. He looked at Jessamine, his expression darkening. "And you, Lady Jessamine, were about to strike a defenseless servant for an accident you caused? I saw your foot move. Do you think me blind, as well as bored?" Jessamine paled, her claws retracting instantly. "Your Majesty, she disrespected the hierarchy. She refused an order." "The hierarchy bores me," Alden deadpanned. He turned back to Ivelisse, his eyes narrowing. He was analyzing her, dissecting her layer by layer. "Tell me, little Wolfless, do you fear me?" "Yes," Ivelisse admitted, the truth slipping out. "Good. Fear keeps you alive." He stepped closer until the buttons of his vest brushed her uniform. The sheer power radiating off him was suffocating, a heat that promised to burn. Most wolves would have bared their necks in submission by now, their instincts forcing them to bow. Ivelisse just stared back. "Why don't you submit?" Alden whispered, leaning down, his voice silky and dangerous. "Why don't you cower? I could snap your neck with a thought. I could order you to stop breathing, and your body would obey." "Because," Ivelisse said, her breath hitching, her eyes locking with his storm-grey ones, "fear is a reaction. Submission is a choice. And I do not choose it." Alden laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "A choice? You think you have choices. You are a rabbit in a den of lions." He reached out, his fingers grazing her chin, tilting her head up. It was a possessive, arrogant gesture. the touch of an owner checking livestock. You are nothing but what we allow you to be. Something inside Ivelisse snapped. It wasn't the insult. She was used to those. It was the arrogance, the absolute certainty that her existence was defined solely by his power. The assumption that because she lacked a beast, she lacked a soul. She didn't think. She didn't plan. Her arm moved on its own, fueled by a lifetime of being looked through, stepped on and silenced. Smack. The sound was thunderous. Her palm connected with the king's cheek with enough force to turn his head. The silence that followed was heavier than death. For 10 heartbeats, no one breathed. The orchestra in the gallery had frozen, boughs hovering over strings. A duchess dropped her fan, but even that sound seemed muffled by the sheer weight of the shock. Blaine Thornwall's mouth was agape, his composure shattered. Jessamine looked as though she might faint, her face draining of color. The royal guards tensed, hands flying to the hilts of their weapons, muscles coiling, waiting for the signal to tear the girl apart. Alden remained turned away, his hair shadowing his eyes. Ivelisse stared at her own hand, horror finally catching up to her adrenaline. Her palm throbbed in time with her heart. I just killed myself, she thought, the realization cold and absolute. This is it. I won't even make it to the door. Then Alden turned. Do it again, he said softly. The court gasped as one entity. Sire? Blaine choked out, stepping forward, his voice rising in panic. She has assaulted the crown. She must be executed immediately. This is high treason. Guards, seize her! Alden raised a single hand, silencing his advisor without looking at him. His gaze was locked on Ivelisse. There was a strange light in his eyes, not fury but fascination, a chaotic, hungry curiosity that was far more dangerous than anger. I gave you a direct command, Alpha to Omega, Alden said, his voice dropping an octave, utilizing the alpha voice, the supernatural tone that forced obedience from all shifters. It was a physical force, a wave of pressure that hit the room like a gravity hammer. I said, do it again. The power of the voice washed over the room. Jessamine dropped to her knees, whining, her forehead touching the floor. Blaine flinched, clutching the edge of a table to stay upright. The guards bowed their heads, their wills overridden by the king's command. But Ivelisse just stood there. She felt the pressure, like a headache forming behind her eyes, a static buzzing in her ears. She saw the air shimmer with the force of his will, but her limbs remained her own. She did not raise her hand. She did not slap him again. No, she whispered. Alden's eyes widened imperceptibly. He took a step back, the red mark on his cheek glowing like a brand. He looked at the groveling nobles, then back at the girl standing tall amidst them. You defied the voice, he murmured. It wasn't a question. It was a revelation. How? I told you, Ivelisse said, her voice shaking but resolute, clutching her wrist to stop the trembling. I am Wolfless. Your rules. Your magic. It doesn't touch me. Alden let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. He turned to the guards, who were waiting for the kill order, their eyes confused as the alpha pressure lifted. Take her, Alden commanded. To the dungeon, sire? The captain of the guard asked, gripping his spear, ready to drag her away. No, Alden said, a cruel, entertained smirk curving his lips. To my private library. Lock her in. Give her food, water, and whatever books she asks for. Sire! Jessamine cried out, forgetting herself, scrambling to her feet. She struck you. You cannot let her live. It makes you look weak. Alden spun on his heel, his cape swirling around him. The playful demeanor vanished, replaced by the terrifying aura of the Alpha King, a darkness that swallowed the light in the room. She is the first thing in this kingdom that hasn't bored me to tears in a decade, Jessamine. If anyone touches a hair on her head, I will hang them from the walls by their own entrails." He looked back at Ivelisse, who was being flanked by 2 massive guards. "We have much to discuss, little Wolfless, about what you are, and why you are the only one who can say no to a king." As the guards escorted her out, gripping her arms firmly but not painfully, Ivelisse caught the eye of an older woman standing in the shadows of the upper gallery. It was Honoria, the keeper of the archives. Honoria didn't look surprised. She looked terrified. She raised a trembling hand to her lips, a silent signal. "Be quiet." Ivelisse was marched out of the ballroom, leaving the shattered glass and the shattered hierarchy behind her. She wasn't dead. But as she entered the dark, torch-lit corridors leading to the king's private wing, she realized she might have walked into a trap far more dangerous than execution. She had become interesting to a monster. The king's library was a fortress of knowledge. 2 stories high, lined with mahogany shelves that stretched into the gloom, filled with the scent of old paper, leather, and dust motes dancing in the moonlight. It was beautiful, a sanctuary of silence, but the heavy iron lock clicking on the outside of the door reminded Ivelisse of what it truly was. A cage. It had been 3 hours. Ivelisse paced the Persian rug, wearing a groove into the intricate pattern. Her mind was racing. She had slapped Alden Ravenshire. She had slapped the Wolf King, and she was alive. Why? The immunity to the voice was the key. She had always known she was different. Wolfless meant no shifting, no enhanced strength, no healing factor. But she had assumed the Alpha Command would still work on her simply because she was born of wolf blood. To find out she was immune, that made her dangerous. It made her a liability to the crown's control. If the peasants knew the king could be defied, the kingdom would crumble. The lock clicked. Ivelisse spun around as the heavy oak doors groaned open. It wasn't the king. Blaine Thornwall slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The king's advisor looked out of place among the books, his suit too sharp, his eyes too restless. He smelled of cold sweat and metallic intent. "You have caused quite a stir," Blaine said, his voice smooth, lacking the growl most alphas use to intimidate, but carrying a viper's strike underneath. "The council is demanding your head. Jessamine's father is threatening to withdraw his support for the northern borders if the insult to his daughter isn't answered in blood." "I did not ask for this," Ivelisse said, retreating behind a heavy oak desk, putting a barrier between them. "Didn't you?" Blaine walked to a shelf, running a finger along the spine of a book, leaving a trail in the dust. "You stood up. You spoke back. You struck him. For a nobody, you have a flair for the dramatic. What do you want?" Blaine turned, his expression hardening. The mask slipped. "I want to know who sent you. Who trained you to resist the voice? The Southern rebels? The Iron Pack?" "No one," Ivelisse said. "I was born this way." "Impossible," Blaine snapped, slamming his hand on a stack of books. "Every creature born of the pack is bound to the pack, unless—" He narrowed his eyes, stepping into the light. "Unless you aren't of the pack at all." He took a step toward her, and for the first time, Ivelisse saw the violence beneath his polished exterior. "The king thinks you are a curiosity, a toy to entertain him. But I know what instability looks like. A subject who cannot be commanded is a cancer, and cancers must be cut out before they spread. Is that a threat? It is a mercy." Blaine smiled thinly, reaching into his jacket. "If you escape now, run into the wilds, I will ensure the guards look the other way. You will likely die out there, but you will die free. Stay, and Alden will destroy you. He breaks everything he touches, girl. He is not a romantic hero. He is a monster bored with his meat." Get out! A deep voice rumbled from the shadows of the upper balcony. Blaine froze. He looked up to see Alden leaning against the wrought-iron railing, watching them. The king had changed out of his ceremonial finery into a loose linen shirt and dark trousers. He looked less like a monarch and more like a predator, stalking its dinner in its own living room. "Your Majesty," Blaine bowed, though his jaw was tight. "I was merely interrogating the prisoner." "She is not a prisoner," Alden said, descending the spiral staircase, his bare feet silent on the wood. "She is my guest, and you are boring her." "Alden, be reasonable," Blaine hissed, dropping the formalities, desperation creeping into his tone. "The council can rot," Alden finished, reaching the ground floor. He walked past Blaine as if he didn't exist, ignoring the advisor entirely, and stopped in front of Ivelisse. He held out a small ice pack wrapped in silk. Ivelisse stared at it, bewildered. "For your hand," Alden said quietly. "You hit me quite hard. It must sting." The absurdity of the moment almost made her laugh. The king was offering her ice for the hand she used to assault him, while his advisor plotted her murder 3 feet away. "Take it," Alden commanded. Then he paused, wincing mockingly. "Ah, right. Commands don't work. Please, take it." Ivelisse reached out and took the ice pack. Their fingers brushed. A shock of static electricity, hot and sharp, zapped between them. It wasn't just a spark, it was a connection, a jolt that felt like touching a live wire. Alden pulled back as if burned. He stared at his hand, flexing the fingers, then looked at her with wide eyes. "Leave us, Blaine," Alden said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, never breaking eye contact with Ivelisse. "This is a mistake," Blaine warned, retreating to the door. "She will be your ruin." When the door clicked shut, the silence returned, heavier than before. Alden walked around the desk and sat on the edge of it, bringing him to eye level with Ivelisse. He smelled of rain, ozone, and something uniquely him, something lonely. "Blaine is right about one thing," Alden said, his grey eyes searching her face. "I do break things, but usually it's because they are fragile." He leaned in. "So tell me, Ivelisse, who is your father?" "I never knew him," she answered honestly. "My mother died when I was born. I was raised by the Pack orphanage." Alden reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. It was old, yellowed with age, and singed at the edges. "Honoria, the archivist, tried to burn this 20 minutes ago. My guard stopped her." He unfolded the paper. It was a birth certificate. "It lists your mother," Alden said, "but the father's name is blank. However, there is a seal stamped on the bottom." He turned the paper toward her. The seal was not a wolf. It was a tree, its roots tangled around a broken crown. "Do you know what this is?" Alden asked. Ivelisse shook her head. "This is the sigil of the Druids," Alden said, the word hanging in the air like smoke. "The ancient enemies of the wolf kind, the ones who created the curse that binds us to the moon." He looked at her, and for the first time, Ivelisse saw fear in the king's eyes. Not for himself, but for the implication. "You aren't wolfless, Ivelisse," Alden whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and terror. "You are the cure." "The cure?" Ivelisse repeated. The word felt heavy, dropping into the space between them, like a stone into deep, dark water. She looked at the birth certificate, then back at the king. "I don't understand. A cure for what? Being a shifter isn't a disease. It's power. It's what makes you... you." Alden laughed, a dry, brittle sound that echoed off the high vaulted ceiling of the library, sounding more like cracking ice than mirth. He turned away from her, walking toward the grand window that overlooked the sprawling, moonlit capital of Viridia. His posture, usually so commanding, slumped with a hidden weight. Power, he mused, his breath fogging the cold glass. That is what the Omegas think. That is what the Betas crave. But ask an Alpha, Ivelisse. Ask me what it feels like. He turned back to her, his silhouette framed by the silver moonlight, making him look less like a king and more like a ghost. It isn't power, it's noise. Constant, deafening noise. The curse of the moon doesn't just give us fur and claws, it strips us of our silence. We are slaves to the pack mind. I feel every shift in emotion in this palace, every spike of fear, every thrum of lust, every jagged edge of ambition. It is a constant, screaming roar in the back of my skull. He walked back to the desk, his movements fluid, predator graceful, but his eyes were exhausted, rimmed with the red irritation of insomnia. "But you," he whispered, looking at her as if she were a cool drink of water in a scorching desert. "When I look at you, it stops. You are a void in the mental web. You are the only quiet thing in my entire kingdom." Ivelisse felt a shiver trace her spine. It wasn't fear this time. It was a strange, magnetic pull. She realized then that the king wasn't keeping her as a prisoner or a pet to be toyed with. He was keeping her as a sanctuary, a living shield against the madness of his own biology. "So my mother," Ivelisse started, her voice steadying as she pieced the puzzle together. "She was a druid, a human with magic. The druids were the guardians of nature before the first Alpha bit into the forbidden fruit of the spirit tree," Alden explained, his finger tracing the tree seal on the parchment. "They cursed us to be beasts, bound to the moon, so we would never forget our savage nature. But legend says they also kept a bloodline pure, a bloodline that could break the hive mind, that could give a wolf the ability to choose. To choose? To choose not to shift, to choose not to kill, to choose love over instinct," Alden said, his eyes darkening with intensity. "Blaine knows this. The Council knows this. Their power relies on the absolute control of the Alpha voice. If the pack discovers that their loyalty to the crown is biologically forced and that there is a way to break it, the kingdom collapses. Anarchy reigns. So Blaine wants to kill me to keep the pack enslaved," Ivelisse concluded, the cold reality settling in. "Precisely. You are the key to the cage." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the library didn't open. They exploded. Wood splinters rained down like shrapnel, pinging off the stone floor. Ivelisse threw her hands up to shield her face as thick, acrid smoke billowed into the room. 3 figures emerged from the haze, clad in the sleek, black stealth armor of the Shadow Guard, assassins loyal only to the highest bidder, moving with unnatural, liquid silence. "Kill the girl!" the lead assassin barked, his voice distorted by a mechanical mask. Alden didn't hesitate. He didn't shift. It would take too long, but he moved with supernatural speed. He flipped the heavy oak desk onto its side with a single hand, creating a barricade, just as a heavy crossbow bolt thudded into the wood, vibrating right where Ivelisse's chest had been a second before. "Stay down!" Alden roared, his eyes flashing a luminous, terrifying red that cut through the smoke. He leaped over the desk, engaging the 3 assassins. It was a blur of violence. Alden caught the first assassin's wrist in mid-swing, snapping the bone with a sickening crunch, and kicked the second into a towering bookshelf, bringing centuries of literature crashing down in a chaotic avalanche. But the third assassin, a lithe beta with dual daggers, slipped past the king's defense and lunged for Ivelisse. Ivelisse scrambled back, her heels skidding on the Persian rug, until her back hit the cold stone wall. The assassin raised a serrated dagger, his eyes glowing a sickly yellow through the slits of his mask. "Submit!" the assassin growled, using a low-level command voice meant to freeze prey in its tracks. Ivelisse felt the pressure of the command like a heavy blanket, but unlike a normal wolf, her muscles didn't lock. Her mind didn't go blank. She saw a heavy brass globe stand next to her, a map of the stars. "No," she grunted, teeth gritted. She grabbed the stand and swung the globe with all her might. The heavy brass base connected with the assassin's temple, just as he lunged. Clang! The blow didn't kill him, but it knocked his aim off. The dagger sliced through her sleeve, grazing her arm, instead of piercing her heart. The assassin stumbled, shocked that his command had failed. That split second of confusion was all Alden needed. The king was there in a heartbeat, his hand closing around the assassin's throat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer mercy. He threw the assailant across the room with enough force to crack the stone wall, the body sliding down limp. Silence returned to the library, broken only by Alden's heavy breathing and the settling of dust. Alden rushed to Ivelisse, his hands hovering over her bleeding arm. The anger in his face was terrifying, a raw, primal thing. But it wasn't directed at her. "They breached the private wing," Alden snarled, his voice vibrating in his chest. "Blaine has moved faster than I anticipated. We cannot stay here." "Where do we go?" Ivelisse asked, clutching her arm, the adrenaline making her hands shake. "You're the king. This is your palace." "A palace is just a prison with nicer drapes when your guards are paid by your enemies," Alden said grimly. He ripped a strip of silk from his own shirt, ruining the fine fabric without a thought, and bound her wound with surprising gentleness. "We need to find Honoria. She knows the layout of the old tunnels, and she knows where the Druid sanctuary is." "And then?" Alden looked at her, his expression unreadable, half in shadow. "And then, little Wolfless, we start a revolution." The catacombs beneath the obsidian palace smelled of damp earth, rust, and forgotten history. Alden led the way, holding a torch that cast dancing shadows against the slimy brickwork, while Ivelisse followed close behind, the pain in her arm settling into a dull, rhythmic throb. They had slipped out through a servant's passage behind a tapestry, leaving the carnage in the library for Blaine to find. "We need to reach the Undercity," Alden said, his voice echoing in the narrow tunnel. "Honoria has a safe house in the district of Ash." "The district of Ash?" Ivelisse asked, horrified. "That's where the exiles live, the criminals, the mad wolves who lost their minds to the moon." "And the only people in this kingdom who don't care about my crown," Alden noted dryly. "It makes them trustworthy, in a way." They emerged from the tunnel into a cavernous underground space that took Ivelisse's breath away. The Undercity was a shanty town, built into the natural caves beneath the capital, a vertical slum clinging to stalactites. It was lit by bioluminescent moss and flickering oil lamps, casting the entire cavern in a ghostly green and orange glow. It was a place for those who had been rejected by their packs, omegas who had snapped, betas who had committed crimes, and the nameless poor. They moved through the shadows, hoods pulled low. Alden's presence was suppressed, his alpha aura tightly coiled inside him to avoid detection. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to dominate this space, but he forced himself to be small. "Hold." A gravelly voice spoke from the darkness, sounding like rocks grinding together. Alden stopped instantly, his hand going to the sword he had taken from the library display. A figure stepped out from behind a pillar of rock. He was massive, broad-shouldered, wearing worn leather armor, patched with wolf pelt and a tattered grey cloak. A jagged scar ran from his brow to his jaw, blinding one eye and giving him a permanent, gruesome grimace. The other eye was a piercing, intelligent blue. He held a heavy, repeating crossbow aimed directly at Alden's chest. "You're a long way from your velvet throne, Your Majesty." The man spat the title like a curse. "Corwin," Alden said, his voice calm, recognizing the man. "I thought you were dead." "I should be," Corwin Ashvale growled, stepping into the dim light. "You sent me to the wilds to die, remember? For the crime of refusing an execution order." Ivelisse stepped forward, peering at the scarred man. The name triggered a memory from the orphanage stories. "Corwin? Corwin Ashvale? The former captain of the guard? The man who never missed?" Corwin's single eye shifted to her. His expression softened instantly, the aggression melting away into shock. You have her eyes." "Who?" Ivelisse asked. "Elara," Corwin whispered, lowering the weapon slightly. "Your mother." Alden lowered his sword. "You knew her mother?" "I loved her," Corwin said, the grief in his voice raw and ancient, untouched by the years. He lowered the crossbow completely. "I was the one ordered to kill her when the council found out she was pregnant with a half-breed, a druid-wolf hybrid. They feared what the child would be, what you would be." He looked at Ivelisse with a profound sadness. "I faked the execution. I hid her in the orphanage. But I couldn't save Elara. She died in childbirth, the strain of carrying a child with no wolf spirit. It was too much for her human body." Ivelisse felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent her life thinking she was abandoned, thrown away like trash. Instead, she had been saved. Her life was bought with blood and sacrifice. "Why are you here, Corwin?" Alden asked, his tone guarded. "I watch over her," Corwin said, gesturing to Ivelisse. "From the shadows. I knew the day would come when her nature would reveal itself. When she slapped you in the Great Hall, I knew the time had come. The signal was lit." "We need to find Honoria," Alden said, urgency creeping back into his voice. "Blaine knows. He sent Shadow Guard into the palace." Corwin spat on the ground. "Thornwall, that snake. If he knows, then the archives are already burning. You won't find Honoria there." "Then where?" Ivelisse asked. "She's with me," Corwin said. "We've been preparing for this war for 20 years. Come. But be warned, King. If you betray her, if you use her as a pawn, I will finish what the wilds couldn't." Alden met the exile's gaze, king to captain. "If I wanted her dead, she would be dead. She is the only thing keeping me sane." Corwin grunted, unconvinced but accepting the truce for now. "Follow me. The wolves are hunting, and the scent of blood is in the air." Corwin's hideout was a converted cistern, dry and fortified, hidden behind a thundering waterfall of sewage runoff that effectively masked their scent from any tracker. Inside, it was surprisingly clean, filled with tactical maps, racked weapons, and, sitting by a small fire, Honoria. The archivist looked up as they entered, her face pale. She didn't bow to the king. She ran straight to Ivelisse, hugging her tightly. "Oh, child," Honoria wept, clutching Ivelisse's face. "I was so afraid when you spoke up. Brave, foolish girl." "We have the certificate," Alden said, placing the document on the rough wooden table. "But we need more than paper. We need to know how to use her bloodline to break the bond." Honoria pulled away, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. She looked at Alden with a mix of pity and severity. "It is not a spell, Your Majesty. It is a choice. The druid blood carries the frequency of the earth, not the moon. If Ivelisse can amplify that frequency, she can jam the alpha signal." "Jam it?" Alden asked. "Like static? Like cutting the strings of a marionette," Honoria corrected. "But to do it, she needs to be at the source, the spirit tree." "The spirit tree was destroyed centuries ago," Alden argued. It's a myth told to pups. No, Corwin interjected, stepping up to the table and stabbing a finger onto a map of the palace. It was buried, beneath the foundation of the obsidian palace, beneath your throne room, Alden. The irony hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The source of their freedom was buried beneath the very symbol of their oppression. So we have to break back into the palace, Ivelisse said, her voice trembling slightly. Into the lion's den, while they are hunting us. We have to do more than that, Corwin said, checking the mechanism of his crossbow, oiling the string. We have to do it tonight. Blaine isn't waiting. Look, he pulled a small crystal sphere from his pocket, a magical communication device used by the guards. He tapped it, and a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room. It was Blaine, standing on the balcony of the palace, his face illuminated by magical lights, addressing a roaring crowd below. Jessamine stood beside him, weeping theatrically into a lace handkerchief. "Citizens of Viridia," Blaine's voice boomed, amplified by magic. "Tonight a tragedy has struck. Our beloved King Alden has been bewitched. A wolfless spy, an assassin sent by our ancient enemies, has used dark magic to enslave his mind. She has abducted him." The crowd howled in outrage, a sound of pure mob fury. "I, Lord Blaine, temporarily assume the mantle of regent until the king is rescued and the witch is burned. The hunt is on. 10,000 gold pieces for the head of the wolfless girl." The projection faded. "He's framing me," Ivelisse whispered, touching her throat. "He's turning the whole kingdom against us." "He's desperate," Alden said, his eyes cold, calculating the moves. "He knows that if I return, his head rolls. He has to kill me to keep power, but he can't be seen killing a king. So he claims I'm bewitched, so his guards can rescue me, which likely means finding my body in a ditch with a dagger in my back." "We have a tactical advantage," Corwin said, pointing to a schematic of the sewers. "They expect us to run for the border. They are watching the gates and the roads. They don't expect us to come straight back at them from beneath." "There is a lift," Honoria added. "An ancient service elevator that leads from the cisterns directly to the sub-basement of the throne room. It hasn't been used in 50 years. Alden looked at Ivelisse. "This is dangerous. If we go up there, there is no retreat. If we fail, we die." Ivelisse looked at the map, then at the birth certificate, and finally at the king. She saw the exhaustion in him, the desperate need for silence. She saw the man beneath the monster. "I spent my whole life being invisible," Ivelisse said, her voice strengthening, steel entering her spine. "I'm tired of hiding. Let's go break your throne, your majesty." Alden smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. It was a dazzling, dangerous smile. "That's my girl." The ascent was grueling. The rusted lift groaned and shuddered as Corwin hand-cranked the mechanism, sweat dripping from his brow. They emerged into the damp stone foundations of the palace, the air thick with dust. Above them, they could hear the rhythmic thumping of feet, the sound of hundreds of soldiers mobilizing. "We need to get to the center of the room," Honoria whispered. "There is a seal on the floor under the rug. Ivelisse needs to place her hand on it and bleed. Her blood will wake the roots." "I'll clear the path," Alden said. He stripped off his ruined shirt, revealing a torso scarred from 100 duels. He looked at Corwin. "Can you hold the rear?" "I'll hold it until hell freezes over," Corwin grunted, loading a fresh bolt. They burst through the secret panel into the great hall. It was chaos. The gala was over, but the hall was filled with soldiers and nobles debating the crisis. Blaine sat on the throne, looking entirely too comfortable, swirling a glass of wine. When the panel burst open, silence fell once again. Alden stepped out, shirtless, bloody, radiating a fury so palpable it cracked the marble beneath his feet. "Get off my chair, Blaine," Alden said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a death sentence. Blaine stood up, his face pale. "Guard! Protect the regent! The king is compromised!" 50 guards drew their swords. "Corwin, now!" Alden roared. Corwin unleashed a hail of bolts, taking out the front line with an impossible accuracy. Alden shifted. It was the first time Ivalis had seen his wolf. He was massive, a midnight black beast with eyes like burning coals, standing twice the height of a man. He tore into the ranks of the guards, a whirlwind of fur and fangs, tossing armored men like rag dolls. "Go!" Honoria shoved Ivalis toward the center of the room. Ivalis ran. The floor was slick with spilled wine and glass from earlier. She reached the center of the room, right in front of the dais. "Stop her!" Blaine screamed, shifting into a russet-colored wolf, leaping from the throne. Alden intercepted him in midair. The two alphas collided with a bone-jarring thud, rolling across the floor, snapping at each other's throats. Ivalis fell to her knees, ripping up the heavy velvet carpet. Beneath it was a stone seal, identical to the one on her birth certificate. The tree and the crown. She grabbed a shard of broken champagne glass from the floor. Perhaps the very same glass she had dropped hours ago. She sliced her palm, wincing as the skin parted. "Ivelisse, look out!" Corwin shouted. Jessamine was there. She had shifted partially, claws and fangs, and she was fast. She backhanded Ivalis across the face. Ivalis flew backward, her head striking the stone. Vision swimming, she saw Jessamine standing over her, claws raised to disembowel. "You ruined everything," Jessamine screeched. Alden was pinned by 3 guards and Blaine. He roared, thrashing, but he couldn't reach her. Corwin was out of ammo, fighting with a knife. Ivalis was alone. She looked at the seal, just inches from her bloody hand. She looked at Jessamine. She remembered Alden's words. Fear is a reaction. Submission is a choice. Ivalis didn't try to fight Jessamine. She didn't try to block the blow. Instead, she lunged forward, not at the girl but at the floor. She slammed her bleeding hand onto the stone seal just as Jessamine's claws came down. The moment Ivalis's blood touched the cold stone of the seal, the world didn't explode. It inhaled. The sounds of battle, the clashing steel, the feral snarls, Jessamine's scream of triumph were sucked into a vacuum of sudden, terrifying pressure. The floor beneath the grand hall groaned, a deep, tectonic rumble that vibrated in the teeth of every living soul in the room. Jessamine froze, her claws inches from Ivalis's face. She looked down, confusion warring with her rage. The gold light in her eyes flickered and died, leaving them a dull, human hazel. My wolf!" Jessamine gasped, stumbling back, her hands trembling. "I can't hear her. It's silent." Then the floor erupted. Not with fire, but with life. Massive, gnarled roots, glowing with veins of ethereal silver light, burst through the marble. They weren't attacking. They were reclaiming. The ancient spirit tree, dormant for 1,000 years beneath the foundations of tyranny, had tasted the blood of its kin and awakened. The shockwave of energy hit the alphas first. Blaine Thornwall, mid-lunge in his wolf form, howled. Not in pain, but in shock, as he was forced back into his human skin. He crashed onto the dais, naked and shivering, the supernatural bulk that gave him his authority evaporating like mist. Around the room, the transformation cascaded. Guards dropped their weapons, clutching their heads as the noise, the constant driving aggression of the pack mind, was severed. The red haze of bloodlust lifted, leaving behind confused men and women who looked at their swords with horror. The mental web that bound them to the Alpha's command had snapped. Alden, still pinned by the guards who were now stumbling away, fell to his knees. He didn't look at the chaos. He looked at Ivelisse. He took a deep, shuddering breath. For the first time in his life, his mind was his own. "Silence," Alden whispered, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "It's finally quiet." Ivelisse remained on the floor, her hand still pressed to the glowing seal. She felt the pulse of the earth, slow, steady, ancient. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. She wasn't controlling them. She was liberating them. "Kill her!" Blaine shrieked from the dais, scrambling to cover himself with the velvet throw from the throne. "She has stolen your spirits. She has neutered you. Kill the witch!" He pointed a shaking finger at Ivelisse. "Guards, I am your regent. Obey me." The captain of the guard looked at Blaine, then at his own trembling hands. He looked at the king, who was slowly rising to his feet. "Your voice is gone, Blaine," Alden said. His voice was no longer the supernatural boom of the Alpha, but it carried a weight far more terrifying, raw, human authority. "You have to ask them nicely now," Blaine snarled, his eyes darting around the room, realizing his supernatural hold was broken. He grabbed a ceremonial sword from the wall display. "I don't need a wolf to kill a traitor and a cripple." He charged down the steps, aimed straight for Ivelisse. Ivelisse was exhausted, the magic of the tree draining her reserves, but she didn't flinch. She didn't have to. Alden moved. Without the enhanced speed of the wolf, he was slower, but he was cleaner. He stepped between Ivelisse and the falling blade. He caught Blaine's wrist, not with claws, but with a grip of iron forged in a lifetime of discipline. "You forgot something, Blaine," Alden gritted out, looking his advisor in the eye. "I didn't rely on the wolf to be king. I relied on the wolf to tolerate you." Alden twisted. The sword clattered to the floor. He drove a fist into Blaine's jaw, a strictly human punch that lacked the bone-shattering force of a shifter, but possessed all the satisfaction of justice. Blaine crumbled to the marble floor, unconscious. "It's over," Corwin announced, stepping out from the shadows, his crossbow resting casually on his shoulder. He looked around the room at the bewildered nobles. "The curse is broken. You aren't a pack anymore. You're just people, and people have to answer for their crimes." Jessamine was weeping on the floor, looking at her manicured hands. "I'm nothing," she sobbed. "I'm just normal. I'm weak." Ivelisse stood up, her legs shaking. She walked over to Jessamine. The court held its breath. Would the Wolfless girl take her revenge? Would she strike the woman who had tormented her? Ivelisse reached down. She didn't strike. She offered a hand. "You aren't nothing," Ivelisse said softly. "You're free. You don't have to be the Luna anymore. You can just be Jessamine." Jessamine looked up, her face streaked with mascara and tears. She looked at the hand, then at Ivelisse's eyes. Eyes that held no malice, only a bone-deep weariness. Slowly, hesitantly, Jessamine took the hand and let Ivelisse pull her up. "Why?" Jessamine whispered. "I tried to kill you." "Because the hierarchy is dead," Ivelisse said, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "We don't look down on people anymore. We look them in the eye." Alden watched her, a look of profound wonder on his face. He walked over to her, ignoring the stares of the court, ignoring the ruins of his throne room. He stopped inches from her. He didn't touch her. He just breathed, savoring the absence of the noise. "You did it," he murmured. "You actually did it." "We did it," Ivelisse corrected. Eldon shook his head. "No. You. I was ready to burn this world down. You saved it." He reached out, taking her bleeding hand, the hand that had slapped him, the hand that had saved his soul, and brought it to his lips. He kissed the palm, right over the cut. "I yield," the king whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. To you. Not as an alpha to an omega, but as a man to a woman. The weeks that followed were chaotic, difficult, and beautiful. The unbinding, as it came to be called, had stripped the shifters of their involuntary shifting and the hive mind, but not their nature. They could still shift, but it was difficult, requiring immense focus and will. It was no longer a reflex of anger, it was a deliberate act. Violence dropped by 90% across the kingdom. Blaine was tried by a jury of peers, not by combat, and sentenced to exile in the wilds. Without his wolf to protect him, it was a death sentence, but he walked away with his head high, too proud to beg. Corwin was reinstated as the commander of the City Watch, though he spent most of his time complaining about the paperwork. Honoria finally got to reorganize the library without fear of censorship. And Ivelisse? She stood on the balcony of the Obsidian Palace, watching the sun set over a city that felt different. The air was lighter. She wore a simple dress, refusing the royal silks Jessamine had tried to offer her as a peace offering. Thinking of running away, she turned to see Alden. He looked different, too. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for decades was gone. He wore simple clothes, no crown. He looked younger, lighter. I thought about it, Ivelisse admitted, turning back to the skyline. I fulfilled my destiny. The curse is broken. I could go anywhere. You could, Alden agreed, stepping beside her. But I hope you don't. Why? Ivelisse asked, looking out at the horizon. You don't need a sanctuary anymore, Alden. The noise is gone. The noise is gone, Alden affirmed. But the silence, it's lonely without you. He turned her to face him. His grey eyes were clear, bright, and intensely focused on her. I don't want you to stay because you're the cure, he said. I want you to stay because you're the only person who ever saw me. Not the king. Not the alpha. Me. Ivelisse searched his face. And what am I to you? The wolfless girl? The anomaly? No, Alden said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. You are the only alpha I ever met who didn't need claws to bring a king to his knees. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. Stay. Rule with me. Not as a queen sitting next to a king, but as a partner. We have a lot of broken things to fix. I'm not royalty, Alden, she whispered. I'm a rebel. Thank the gods for that, he chuckled. I need a rebel. The crown is heavy, Ivelisse. Help me carry it. He kissed her then. It wasn't the hungry, possessive kiss of a shifter. It was slow, deliberate, and devastatingly tender. It tasted of rain, ozone, and freedom. Ivelisse closed her eyes and kissed him back. She realized then that she had never really been wolfless. She had just been waiting for a pack of two. Okay, she whispered against his lips. I'll stay. Good, Alden smiled, pulling her close, because I was about to order you to. Ivelisse pulled back, raising an eyebrow. Excuse me? Alden laughed, a true, deep laugh that shook his chest. I'm kidding. I know better now. I remember the slap. Don't you forget it, she grinned. Below them, the city lights flickered on, one by one, illuminating a kingdom where fear had been replaced by choice, and where the strongest heart wasn't the one with the sharpest teeth, but the one brave enough to break the silence. The story of Ivelisse and Alden reminds us that true power does not reside in titles, biology, or the ability to dominate others. Real strength is found in the courage to defy a broken system, the resilience to stand alone when the world demands submission, and the wisdom to choose compassion over instinct. We all have wolves inside us, impulses of anger, fear, and ego, but we also have the human choice to silence them. Love, in its purest form, is not about finding someone who completes your power, but finding someone who quiets your noise. It is about finding the person who sees the human beneath the crown. If this story of rebellion, romance, and redemption moved you, please like this story, share it with the rebels in your life, and subscribe for more tales of love that defies the odds. Remember, even the smallest voice can shatter the loudest silence.